They expected her to scream. They expected her to beg on her knees. When David threw her out of the mansion she had helped him build brick by brick, everyone waited for the tears. But Sarah Jenkins didn't shed a single drop. She simply signed the papers, picked up her one battered suitcase, and walked into the rain. David laughed, thinking he had won. He thought she was nothing but a discarded stepping stone. But he was wrong. Dead wrong. Because exactly 30 days later, at the stroke of midnight, the doors to the most exclusive gala in New York swung open. And the woman on the arm of the city's most dangerous billionaire wasn't a stranger. It was the wife David thought he had destroyed. And she wasn't there to dance. She was there to hunt. The rain in Seattle that night was relentless. It battered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse at the generic Skyline Heights complex, a building that screamed new money. Inside, the air was colder than the storm outside. Sarah stood by the marble kitchen island, her hands rough from years of manual labor scrubbing floors, waiting tables, and typing up David's manuscripts until 4:00 a.m. rested flat on the cold stone. Across from her stood David Thorne. He looked impeccable in a tailored navy suit, the kind Sarah had saved for 3 years to buy him for his first big interview. Now he wore it like armor against her. "It's not working, Sarah," David said. He didn't even look at her. He was busy adjusting his cufflinks, checking his reflection in the darkened window. "We've grown apart. You have to see that." "Grown apart?" Sarah's voice was a whisper. It wasn't weak. It was just quiet. "David, I worked 3 shifts at the diner so you could finish your architecture degree. I sold my mother's ring so you could buy your buy-in for the firm. We didn't grow apart. You climbed up on my back, and now you're standing on my head." David finally turned, his face handsome in a sharp, predatory way twisted into a sneer. "Don't be dramatic. I'm grateful, sure. But look at you, Sarah. Look at this place." He gestured around the multi-million-dollar apartment. "I'm a senior partner at Thorne & Associates now. I have galas to attend, investors to charm, and you—" He looked her up and down, grimacing at her faded cardigan and jeans. "You're still a waitress at heart. You don't fit the narrative anymore." He slid a manila envelope across the counter. The sound of paper sliding on marble was like a blade being sharpened. "The alimony is generous," he said, his tone dismissing her. "Take it. Sign the papers. Chloe is moving in tomorrow." The name hung in the air. Chloe. Chloe van der Hoven, the daughter of the city's biggest real estate mogul. She was 23, blonde, and had never worked a day in her life. Sarah had seen the text on David's phone weeks ago. She knew this was coming. David braced himself. He expected the hysterics. He expected Sarah to throw the vase of lilies on the table. He expected her to remind him of the nights he cried in her lap when he failed his exams, promising her the world if she just stuck by him. But Sarah did none of that. She reached into her purse, pulled out a cheap ballpoint pen, and flipped the document open. Scratch. Scratch. She signed her name. Sarah Jenkins, not Sarah Thorne. She had never legally changed it because David had said it was too much paperwork at the time. She closed the folder. "Keep the money," Sarah said. Her voice was steady, terrifyingly calm. "I don't want a penny of what you think you earned." David blinked, stunned. "You're refusing the settlement, Sarah. Don't be stupid. You have nowhere to go. You have nothing." Sarah picked up her small, worn suitcase near the door. She had packed it an hour before he even arrived. She walked to the door, her spine straight, her eyes dry. "I have my dignity, David," she said, opening the heavy oak door. "And I have my memory. You seem to have lost yours." "What is that supposed to mean?" David snapped, his ego bruised by her lack of devastation. "It means," Sarah said, looking back one last time, "that you think you built this empire alone. You forgot who fixed your blueprints when the structural loads were wrong. You forgot who ghost wrote your thesis. Enjoy the top, David. It's a long way down." She closed the door. David stared at the wood, a strange shiver running down his spine. But then his phone buzzed, a text from Chloe. "Is the trash taken out?" David smirked, the unease vanishing. "Yes," he muttered to the empty room. "The trash is gone." The Obsidian Ball was the event of the year. Held at the Grand Kensington Hotel in downtown Seattle, it was where deals were made, careers were launched, and social statuses were solidified. Tickets cost $10,000 a plate. David Thorne walked up the red carpet with Chloe van der Hoeven on his arm. Chloe was dazzling in a red sequined dress that cost more than Sarah used to make in a year. Cameras flashed. "Smile, David," Chloe hissed through her teeth, waving at the paparazzi. "My father is watching. If you want him to invest in your new skyscraper project, you need to look like a winner." "I am a winner," David said, puffing out his chest. "I got rid of the dead weight. Now I have you." Inside the ballroom was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. Crystal chandeliers the size of cars hung from the ceiling. David felt like a king. He shook hands with senators and CEOs. He was finally where he belonged. However, the buzz in the room wasn't about him. It wasn't even about Chloe's father. "Did you hear?" a banker whispered near the champagne fountain. "Lucas Sterling is coming tonight." David froze. Lucas Sterling. The name was a legend. The reclusive billionaire behind Sterling Industries, a global conglomerate that owned everything from shipping lines to tech firms. Sterling was known for two things. He was ruthlessly intelligent, and he never attended public events. He was the white whale of investors. If David could get 5 minutes with Sterling, his career would go from successful to legendary. "He's never come to the Obsidian Ball," David scoffed. "It's a rumor." "No," the banker insisted. "His private jet landed an hour ago, and they say he's brought a partner, a new chief strategy officer." Suddenly the lights in the ballroom dimmed. The chatter died down instantly. The massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. A spotlight hit the top of the stairs. A man stepped out, tall, with broad shoulders and eyes like polished steel. He wore a tuxedo that fit him so perfectly it looked like a second skin. It was Lucas Sterling. The room gasped. But then Sterling turned slightly and offered his arm to someone in the shadows behind him. A woman stepped into the light. The silence in the room became heavy, suffocating. She wore a dress of midnight blue velvet, cut dangerously low in the back, shimmering as if it were made of the night sky itself. Diamonds, real heavy, flawless diamonds, glittered at her throat and ears. Her hair, usually tied back in a messy bun, cascaded down her back in luxurious waves. Her makeup was sharp, accentuating eyes that scanned the room with the precision of a hawk. David dropped his champagne glass. It shattered on the floor, the sound echoing in the silence. Chloe frowned, looking at the mess. "David, what is wrong with you?" David couldn't speak. He was paralyzed. He looked at the woman on the arm of the most powerful man in the world. It was Sarah. But it wasn't the Sarah who smelled like bleach and onions. It wasn't the Sarah who wore threadbare cardigans. This woman radiated power. She held her head high, her hand resting lightly, comfortably on Lucas Sterling's arm. That's impossible," David stammered, his face draining of color. Lucas and Sarah began to descend the stairs. Every eye followed them. They moved with a synchronized grace like predators entering a clearing. As they reached the bottom of the stairs, the crowd parted like the Red Sea. They walked straight toward the center of the room, straight toward where David and Chloe were standing. David's heart hammered against his ribs. "She's here to make a scene," he thought. "She's going to beg. She used her looks to snag a rich guy, and now she's going to rub it in my face." He straightened his tie, trying to regain his composure. He decided to strike first. If he could humiliate her before she spoke, he could control the narrative. As Sarah and Lucas passed, David stepped forward, blocking their path. "Well, well," David said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding crowd to hear. He put on a mocking smile. "I didn't know the waitstaff was allowed to dress up tonight, Sarah. Who did you have to sleep with to rent those diamonds? The crowd gasped. Chloe snickered behind her hand. Lucas Sterling stopped. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He looked at David with the kind of disinterest a lion has for a buzzing fly. But Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't look at Lucas for help. She stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. She stood toe-to-toe with David, smelling of expensive jasmine and cold vengeance. "Hello, David," she said. Her voice was smooth-cultured, devoid of the exhaustion he was used to. "It's funny you mention renting." She reached into her clutch and pulled out a sleek black business card. She didn't hand it to him. She tucked it into the breast pocket of his expensive suit, patting his chest patronizingly. "I'm not here as a +1. Sarah said, her voice projecting clearly across the silent room. "I'm here as the new majority shareholder of the architectural firm you work for. Sterling Industries just acquired Thorne and Associates this morning." David's knees buckled. "What?" Sarah leaned in close, her lips brushing his ear, but her eyes locked on Chloe. "That's right, David. I'm not your ex-wife anymore. I'm your boss, and we have a lot of performance reviews to go through." She pulled back, gave him a chilling smile, and turned to Lucas. "Shall we, Mr. Sterling? I believe there are people here actually worth our time." Lucas smirked, a rare expression that terrified everyone watching. "After you, Ms. Jenkins." They walked away, leaving David standing in the shattered glass of his champagne as the whispers of the elite began to rise around him like a tidal wave. To understand how Sarah stood at the top of those stairs in diamonds, we have to go back to the moment the door clicked shut on David's apartment. 30 days ago. 11:45 p.m. Sarah dragged her suitcase through the rain. She didn't have money for a hotel. David had access to their joint accounts, and he had emptied them that morning in preparation for the separation. She had $40 in cash tips in her pocket. She found refuge in a 24-hour diner called the Rusty Spoon, 3 blocks away. She ordered a black coffee, her hands shaking as she warmed them against the ceramic mug. She was homeless, divorced, broken. But Sarah had a habit she couldn't break. Even when her world was falling apart, her mind sought order in chaos. She pulled a napkin from the dispenser and took out a pen. She began to sketch. She wasn't drawing flowers or sad faces. She was sketching the structural load distribution for the Vanguard Museum, David's current massive project. The one he was stuck on. He had been screaming for weeks that the cantilever wouldn't hold. On the napkin, Sarah solved it in 5 minutes. She adjusted the fulcrum point and added a hidden truss system. "You're off by 3 degrees, a deep voice said. Sarah jumped, covering the napkin. A man was standing at the end of her booth. He was soaking wet, wearing a black trench coat. He didn't look like he belonged in a cheap diner. He looked like he owned the city block. It was Lucas Sterling. Sarah didn't recognize him instantly. She only knew him as the stranger who had been sitting in the corner booth watching her for the last 20 minutes. "Excuse me," Sarah asked, her guard up. The man slid into the booth opposite her without asking. He pointed a long finger at the napkin. "The Vanguard Museum. The design is flawed. The architect David Thorne has been trying to force a suspension cable where a truss is needed. You just fixed it with a ballpoint pen on a napkin." Sarah stared at him. "How do you know about the Vanguard?" "I'm the one paying for it," Lucas said simply. "I'm Lucas Sterling." Sarah froze. "The billionaire client?" The man David was terrified of. The man David had been lying to for months, claiming the delays were due to permitting issues rather than his own incompetence. I shouldn't be doing this," Sarah stammered, crumpling the napkin. "David is the architect. I was his wife." "Was..." Lucas caught the word. His eyes dropped to the suitcase beside her. "Did he throw you out?" Sarah looked away ashamed. "We had irreconcilable differences. He thinks I hold him back." Lucas laughed. It was a dark, dry sound. "Hold him back, Sarah. I've been auditing Thorne and Associates for 6 months. I know David is a mediocrity, but every few months a brilliant solution appears in his files. Different handwriting, different logic. A genius ghost in the machine. I came here tonight because my private investigator told me David's ghost had just been evicted. He reached across the table and uncrumpled the napkin. He looked at the sketch, then up at her. I don't want David, Lucas said intensely. I never did. I want the person who drew this. I want the person who saved the Helix Bridge from collapsing in the simulation. I want the ghost. I have nothing, Mr. Sterling, Sarah whispered, tears finally stinging her eyes. He took the house, the money, my name. Then let's take it back, Lucas said. He pulled a contract out of his coat pocket. It was dry, protected by a leather folder. This is a contract for the position of Chief Strategy Officer and Lead Architect at Sterling Industries. The salary is 10 times what David makes, and it includes a signing bonus that will let you buy whatever clothes and whatever company you want. Sarah looked at the paper. It seemed like a dream. Why, because I hate thieves. Lucas said, his eyes flashing with a dangerous light. And David Thorne stole your life. I'm giving you the hammer to break him. Do we have a deal? Sarah looked at the rain outside. She thought of Chloe moving into her home. She thought of David's sneer. She picked up the pen she used to fix his buildings. Do I get to fire him? She asked. Lucas smiled. Oh, Sarah, that's too easy. You get to own him. She signed. The conference room at Thorne & Associates was in chaos. The partners were shouting. The stock price was volatile. David Thorne sat at the head of the table nursing a pounding headache. The humiliation at the gala had gone viral. #Thorne Takedown was trending on Twitter. Calm down, David yelled, slamming his hand on the table. So Sterling bought a majority share. So what? He's an investor. He's not an architect. He needs us. He needs me. I'm the face of this firm. Mark, a senior partner with gray hair and zero patience, scoffed. The face. You're the laughingstock, David. You told us Sarah was a nobody. Now she's Sterling's right hand. She's sleeping with him. David insisted, desperate. It's a fling. It'll blow over in a week. When she comes crawling back, and she will, I'll make sure she signs over those shares to us. The doors to the conference room burst open. It wasn't a secretary with coffee. 2 large security guards in black suits stepped in, flanking the door. Then Sarah walked in. She wore a white power suit that was tailored to perfection, contrasting sharply with the gloom of the room. She carried nothing but a tablet. She didn't look at the partners. She walked straight to the head of the table where David was sitting. David stood up, trying to use his height to intimidate her. Sarah, you can't just barge in here. This is a partners' meeting. Get out before I call the police. Sarah didn't blink. She looked at the chair he was sitting in. You're in my seat, David. Your seat? David laughed, looking around the room for support. You think because you wore a fancy dress you run this place, I built this company? Sarah tapped her tablet. The large screen on the wall behind David flickered to life. It displayed a legal document. The acquisition deed. Actually, Sarah said, her voice calm and authoritative, Sterling Industries now owns 51% of Thorne & Associates. As the appointed representative of the majority shareholder, I am the acting CEO, effective immediately. The room went dead silent. Mark, the senior partner, sat down slowly. Now, Sarah said, her eyes boring into David. Move. David's face turned purple. He looked at Mark. He looked at the other partners. Everyone looked away. They knew where the power lay now. Humiliated, David grabbed his notebook and shuffled to an empty chair at the far end of the table, the spot usually reserved for interns. Sarah sat down at the head of the table. She swiveled the chair, looking comfortable, powerful. Let's get to business, she said. I've spent the weekend reviewing the accounts. It seems there are some discrepancies. She swiped her tablet. The screen changed. It showed a series of wire transfers. David, Sarah said, Would you like to explain why $200,000 of company funds was transferred to an account under the name Chloe Vanderhoven for interior design consulting? The partners gasped. What? Mark shouted. David, you told us that money was for the structural steel permits. She consulted, David stammered, sweating profusely. She has an eye for color. She's a college dropout who thinks beige is a personality trait. Sarah deadpanned. That is embezzlement, David. You can't prove that, David shrieked. I can, Sarah said, because I also recovered the emails where you told her, and I quote, "Don't worry, babe, the old partners are too stupid to notice I'm draining the permit fund." Mark stood up, his face red with rage. You son of a... Sit down, Mark, Sarah commanded. She was in total control. We aren't going to press charges. David let out a breath of relief. See? She still loves me. She won't send me to jail. No. Sarah smiled, and it was the coldest thing David had ever seen. Jail is too private. You'd get to hide there. I have a better idea. She stood up and walked over to David. You are hereby removed as senior partner, she announced. You're firing me? David asked, his voice trembling. No. If I fire you, you get a severance package. You get to leave. I'm demoting you. She dropped a lanyard on the table in front of him. It was a green badge, the badge for a junior draftsman. You will work in the basement archives, Sarah said. Your job is to digitize every blueprint from 1980 to the present. You will be paid minimum wage. You will report to the intern, Gary. And if you quit, the embezzlement evidence goes straight to the district attorney, and you go to prison for 10 years. David stared at the green badge. It was a death sentence for his ego. You can't do this, he whispered. I just did, Sarah said. She turned back to the room. Now, does anyone else have a problem with the new leadership? The room was silent. Good, Sarah said. Meeting adjourned. David, don't be late for your shift. Gary hates tardiness. As the partners filed out, avoiding David like he was a leper, Sarah stood by the window. She watched the city below. Her phone buzzed. A text from Lucas Sterling. Did he cry? Sarah smiled and typed back, not yet. But he will. But as she put her phone away, the door opened again. It wasn't David leaving. It was Chloe Vanderhoven. And she didn't look scared. She looked furious. You think you've won, you little waitress? Chloe spat, storming into the room. My father is the biggest developer in this city. He's coming for you. And he plays dirty. Sarah turned slowly. I'm counting on it, Chloe. Tell Daddy I said hello. The honeymoon phase of Sarah's takeover was over. The reality of war had set in. Sarah sat in the corner office that used to be David's. It looked different now. The ego-boosting portraits of David were gone, replaced by architectural schematics and models. She was working 18-hour days to fix the mess David had left behind. Her biggest challenge was the Vanguard Museum. It was the crown jewel of the firm's portfolio, and under Sarah's new design, it was finally stable. The concrete was pouring, the steel was rising, and the press was calling her the Cinderella architect. But the wolves were circling. On a rainy Tuesday, the intercom buzzed. Ms. Jenkins, Marcus Vanderhoven is here to see you. He says it's urgent. Sarah stiffened. Chloe's father. The shark of Seattle real estate. Send him in. Marcus Vanderhoven was a large man who took up too much space. He didn't walk. He marched. He threw a heavy file onto Sarah's desk. You're making a mistake, little girl, Marcus rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel in a mixer. You embarrassed my daughter. You embarrassed me. I simply exposed theft, Mr. Vanderhoven, Sarah said, not looking up from her blueprints. If your daughter didn't want to be embarrassed, she shouldn't have accepted stolen money. Marcus leaned over the desk, his face turning an ugly shade of red. You think having Lucas Sterling's backing makes you untouchable? Lucas is a businessman. He cuts losses. And you are about to become a very big loss. Is that a threat? It's a forecast, Marcus sneered. Enjoy the view while it lasts, Construction is a dangerous business. Accidents happen. He turned and left. Sarah felt a cold knot in her stomach. She immediately picked up the phone to call the site foreman at the Vanguard. "Tony? It's Sarah. Triple-check the safety protocols today. I have a bad feeling." "Don't worry, boss," Tony said. "We're solid. The main support beam goes up at 2:00 p.m. It'll be picture perfect." 2:00 p.m., the Vanguard Museum construction site. Sarah stood on the observation deck wearing a white hard hat. Lucas stood beside her. He had flown in from Tokyo just to see the beam placement. "You seem tense." Lucas noted his eyes scanning the site. "Marcus van der Hoven paid me a visit," Sarah admitted. "He practically promised something would go wrong." "Marcus is a bully," Lucas said, his voice calm. "But he's not stupid. He won't try anything in broad daylight." Below them, the massive crane hoisted the multi-ton steel beam. It was the spine of the museum. If this fit, the building was structurally sound. The beam lowered. The workers guided it into place. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the site. It sounded like a gunshot. Then came the screeching of metal. One of the secondary support cables on the crane snapped. The beam swung violently to the left, smashing into the newly poured concrete wall. The scaffolding where 3 workers were standing shuddered and began to collapse. "Look out!" Sarah screamed, gripping the railing. The beam swung back wildly out of control. It smashed into the main pillar, the one Sarah had redesigned. The pillar crumbled. Not just cracked, crumbled. It turned to dust and rubble instantly, as if it were made of chalk, not reinforced concrete. The beam crashed to the ground, taking half the north wing with it. Dust billowed up, choking the air. Sirens began to wail immediately. Sarah stared in horror. The pillar shouldn't have crumbled. Even with the impact, the physics didn't make sense. "My design," she whispered. "It failed." Lucas grabbed her arm, pulling her back as the observation deck shook. "Sarah, we need to go. Now." But Sarah couldn't move. She saw the workers scrambling from the dust. She saw the news drone hovering overhead, capturing every second of the disaster. Within an hour, the headlines were already live. "Waitress turned architect causes catastrophe. Vanguard Museum collapses." And in the basement of Thorne & Associates, David Thorne watched the news on his phone. He smiled for the first time in weeks. "Told you," he whispered to the empty archives. "She's a fraud." The next morning, the board wanted Sarah's head. The stock price of Sterling Industries had dipped, a rare occurrence. The media was eating Sarah alive. Marcus van der Hoven was on TV looking grave, saying, "This is what happens when you let amateurs play with millions of dollars. My daughter's fiancé David tried to warn them." Sarah sat in her office, the blinds drawn. She felt defeated. She had checked her math 1,000 times. The load-bearing capacity was correct. The pillar should have held. The door opened. It was Lucas. He locked the door behind him and placed a heavy box on her desk. "They want me to fire you," Lucas said. Sarah looked down at her hands. "Maybe you should." "The pillar turned to dust, Lucas. I must have missed something." "You didn't miss anything," Lucas said sharply. He opened the box. Inside was a chunk of concrete. It was from the failed pillar. "I had a private team go into the site last night," Lucas explained. "We took samples before the city inspectors who are on van der Hoven's payroll could get there. Look at it." Sarah picked up the concrete. It felt light, too light. She rubbed it between her fingers. It was brittle. "There's too much sand," Sarah said, her eyes widening. "And, is that sawdust?" "Sawdust," Lucas confirmed. "Someone tampered with the mix. They diluted the concrete so it would pass a visual inspection but crumble under stress. This wasn't a design flaw, Sarah. It was sabotage." Sarah's eyes narrowed. The despair vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp fury. "The concrete pouring was approved last Tuesday. I signed the order for Grade A industrial mix." "Who oversaw the delivery?" Lucas asked. Sarah went to her computer. She pulled up the logs. "The site manager signed it off. But wait. She zoomed in on the digital signature. It was time-stamped at 12:30 p.m. Tony, the site manager, was at lunch with me at 12:30 p.m. to discuss the unions, Sarah said. He couldn't have signed this. She traced the authorization code. It came from an internal terminal, terminal ID B004. Sarah gasped. B004. That's a computer in the basement archives. Lucas's face darkened. David. Sarah stood up. He didn't just try to ruin my career. He could have killed those workers. He swapped the concrete order. He likely did it on Vanderhoven's orders, Lucas surmised. Marcus needs the land the museum sits on. If the project fails, the city revokes the permit and Marcus buys the lot for pennies. They set David up, Sarah realized. David is stupid enough to change the order to make me look bad, but he doesn't realize that doing so is a felony that carries 20 years in prison. Marcus used him as the fall guy. So, Lucas stepped closer, his voice low and dangerous. How do you want to play this? We have the evidence. Sarah looked at the chunk of sabotage concrete. Marcus expects me to hide, she said. He expects a resignation letter. Let's give him a show instead. 3 hours later, the press room was packed. Marcus Vanderhoven stood at the podium with Chloe and David by his side. David was wearing his best suit again, looking smug. It is a tragedy, Marcus was saying into the microphones. But we must look forward. I am offering to buy the Vanguard site and clean up this mess, and David Thorne has graciously agreed to step back in as lead architect to ensure safety. David stepped up to the mic. Thank you, Marcus. It's hard to see my life's work destroyed by incompetence. But I am ready to lead again. Are you? The voice cut through the room. Sarah walked in from the back. She wasn't wearing a suit this time. She was wearing jeans and a hard hat covered in dust from the site. She looked like a warrior. Lucas Sterling walked a step behind her, silent and imposing. Ms. Jenkins, Marcus barked. This is a closed press conference for the adults. I brought show and tell, Sarah said. She walked up to the podium and slammed the box of crumbling concrete next to Marcus's hand. This is the concrete from the collapsed pillar, she announced to the cameras. It's 40% sawdust. The reporters gasped. Flashes went off like a lightning storm. That proves your incompetence, David shouted. You ordered bad materials. Did I? Sarah pulled out a piece of paper. This is the change order. It was authorized from terminal B004. Your computer, David. David's face went pale. I didn't. You did. Sarah continued, her voice rising. You logged in at 12:30 p.m. last Tuesday. You canceled the grade A mix and ordered the cheap filler from a shell company owned by... She paused, looking at Marcus. Owned by Vanderhoven Materials, LLC. The room erupted. Reporters began shouting questions. Marcus Vanderhoven looked like he was about to explode. He grabbed the microphone. She's lying. This is a fabrication. Is it? Lucas Sterling stepped forward. He held up a USB drive. I have the security footage from the basement archives. It shows David typing the order. And it shows him on speakerphone. With you, Marcus. Lucas played the audio into the microphone. The room went silent. David's voice. Are you sure this will just cause a crack? I don't want the whole building down. Marcus's voice. Just do it, you idiot. The girl needs to fail. Swap the order. I'll take care of the rest. The recording ended. David looked at Marcus, horrified. You said it would just be a crack. You said no one would get hurt. Shut up! Marcus roared, shoving David. It's over, Sarah said calmly. The police are waiting outside. For both of you, Chloe screamed. David slumped to the floor, sobbing. Marcus Vanderhoven tried to run out the back exit, but 2 police officers blocked his path. Sarah watched as her ex-husband was handcuffed. As he was dragged away, he looked at her one last time. There was no arrogance left, only regret. "Sarah," he mouthed. "Help me." Sarah looked at him, her expression unreadable. She didn't look away, but she didn't step forward. She simply stood her ground, the architect of her own destiny. Lucas placed a hand on the small of her back. "You did it." "Not yet," Sarah said, watching the police cars flash outside. "David was the pawn. Marcus was the knight. But I still have a company to rebuild." She turned to the cameras, squared her shoulders, and spoke. "The Vanguard Museum will be built," she declared. "And it will be built right, because I'm not going anywhere." The gavel hit the wood with a sound that seemed to shatter David Thorne's life into irreparable shards. "Mr. Thorne," the judge had said, looking down from the bench with utter disdain, "for the crime of corporate sabotage, reckless endangerment, and fraud, you are sentenced to 5 years in a federal correctional facility. You are also permanently stripped of your architectural license." Sarah didn't stay to see them cuff him. She didn't stay to see Chloe Vanderhoven weeping fake tears for the cameras outside the courthouse, claiming she was just a victim of love. Sarah simply turned her heel and walked out of the courtroom, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses flanked by Sterling Industries security. Now, 3 days later, the silence in the penthouse office of the newly rebranded SNL Global was deafening. It was midnight. Sarah Jenkins sat in the chair that used to belong to David. The office looked like a battlefield after the smoke had cleared. Boxes were stacked in the corners, David's awards, his fake accolades, his ego, all packed away to be incinerated. The massive gold letters spelling Thorne had been pried off the lobby wall downstairs, leaving ghost-like scars in the plaster that the painters were covering up. Sarah swiveled the chair toward the floor-to-ceiling window. The Seattle rain was falling again, just as it had been 35 days ago when she stood on the street with a suitcase. She had won. It was a total, absolute victory. Marcus Vanderhoven's assets were frozen. David was in a cell. The board of directors was eating out of the palm of her hand. But as she looked at her reflection in the dark glass, she didn't feel the elation she expected. She felt a strange, hollow exhaustion. She had spent so many years being the fuel for David's engine, and the last month being the wrecking ball to his life. Now she didn't know who she was when she wasn't fighting for survival. The heavy oak door creaked open. Sarah didn't turn around. "I told the cleaning crew to skip this floor tonight." "I'm not the cleaning crew." The voice was low, rich, and instantly calmed the storm in her chest. Lucas Sterling. He walked into the room, the dim light catching the sharp angles of his face. He was holding a bottle of amber liquid, a vintage whiskey that probably cost more than David's car, and 2 heavy crystal glasses. He didn't ask permission. He simply walked to the desk, poured 2 fingers into each glass, and slid one across the mahogany surface toward her. "To the victor," Lucas said quietly. Sarah turned the chair. She looked at the glass, then up at him. He was impeccable as always, but his tie was loosened, the top button of his shirt undone. It was the most unbuttoned she had ever seen him. "It feels less like a victory and more like a demolition," Sarah admitted, picking up the glass. "I brought the house down, Lucas, but now I'm standing in the rubble." "That is the nature of architecture, Sarah," Lucas replied, leaning against the edge of the desk, invading her personal space in a way that felt protective rather than aggressive. "Before you can build a skyscraper, you have to excavate the dirt. You have to clear the rot. You've done the hard part." Sarah took a sip of the whiskey. It burned, grounding her. She looked at Lucas, really looked at him, this billionaire enigma who had descended from the sky to save her. Why me? The question hung in the air, heavy and inevitable. Lucas swirled his drink, watching the liquid catch the light. "We've been over this. You're a genius, Sarah. You fixed the Vanguard on a napkin." "No," Sarah said, her voice firm. She stood up, matching his height. "That's the business answer. I want the truth. You didn't just hire an architect. You declared war for me. You spent millions acquiring a failing firm just to give me the weapon to kill David. You put your own reputation on the line when the pillar collapsed." That isn't business, Lucas. That's personal. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. I was a waitress. I was a nobody. Why did the great Lucas Sterling care if I lived or died? Lucas went silent. He set his glass down on the desk with a deliberate clink. He looked at her, and the mask of the cold corporate raider slipped. Beneath it was something intense, something burning that had been contained for a very long time. He turned and walked toward a large gray filing cabinet in the corner, one of the few pieces of furniture Sarah hadn't thrown out yet. It was locked. David was a thief, Lucas said, his back to her. But he was also a hoarder. He kept everything he stole because he couldn't replicate it. Lucas pulled a small key from his pocket where he got it. Sarah didn't know and unlocked the bottom drawer. He pulled out a large black portfolio case. It was covered in dust. Sarah's breath hitched. That's my college portfolio. Yes, Lucas said. He carried it over and laid it on the desk. University of Washington Senior Thesis Review. 12 years ago. He opened the case. Inside were the hand-drawn schematics of the Helix Tower, a design based on the double helix structure of DNA, creating a spiraling organic building that generated its own energy. It was beautiful. It was revolutionary. I was there, Lucas said softly. Sarah blinked. What? I was a guest judge that day, Lucas revealed. I was 28. I had just made my first billion in tech, and the dean invited me to sit in the back row. I watched 30 students present boxes and rectangles, and then you walked up. He traced the line of her drawing with a finger. You were wearing a thrift store blazer that was too big for you. You were nervous. You dropped your laser pointer. But then you started speaking. You spoke about how buildings should breathe. You spoke about structural empathy. And then you unveiled this. He tapped the helix drawing. I sat there in the dark, Lucas continued, his voice rough with emotion, and I realized I was looking at the future. I told myself I was going to offer you a job the second you graduated. I wanted to build the world with you, Sarah. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. I never knew you were there. I waited, Lucas said, a flash of anger crossing his face. But 3 months later I saw this design on the cover of Architectural Digest. But your name wasn't on it. David Thorne's name was on it. Sarah looked down at the drawing, the memory washing over her. He told me we were partners. He said the industry wouldn't respect a woman straight out of school. He said he would pave the way for us. He lied, Lucas spat. I investigated him. I found out he had married you. And then you vanished. The brilliant girl from the auditorium disappeared into his shadow. I watched his firm for a decade, Sarah. Every time a brilliant design came out of Thorne Associates, I knew it was you. And every time a disaster happened, I knew it was him. So you watched me, Sarah whispered, for 12 years. I waited for you to leave him, Lucas corrected firmly. I couldn't save you if you didn't want to be saved. I couldn't intervene in a marriage. So I watched. I waited for the spark to return. And then 6 weeks ago, my private investigator told me David had filed for divorce. He told me he had kicked you out. Lucas stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. He reached out his hand, cupping her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she didn't know had fallen. I was in my car across the street when you walked out into the rain with that suitcase. I wanted to kill him right then. But I knew you didn't need a savior, Sarah. You needed a sword. So I went to the diner. I waited for you to pick up a pen. And when you fixed that museum design on a napkin despite having lost everything, I knew the genius hadn't died. She was just waking up. Sarah looked at him, her heart hammering against her ribs. The realization washed over her like a tidal wave. She hadn't been invisible. All those late nights, all those stolen credits, all those years of being told she was nothing. The most powerful man in the world had been watching, waiting for her to rise. You risked everything for a memory of a drawing, Sarah said, her voice trembling. I risked everything for the architect, Lucas whispered, and I would do it again. The tension in the room snapped. Sarah didn't think. She acted. She grabbed the lapels of his jacket and pulled him down. Lucas met her halfway. His arms wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him, lifting her slightly off the floor. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was a collision. It was 12 years of missed opportunities and 30 days of adrenaline crashing together. It tasted of whiskey and rain and absolute undeniable certainty. When they finally broke apart, breathless forehead resting against forehead, Sarah felt the hollowness inside her fill with something new. Strength. "We have a lot of work to do, Mr. Sterling," she whispered. Lucas smirked, the dangerous glint returning to his eyes. "The Vanguard is a ruin. The press is waiting. The world thinks we're crazy." Sarah pulled back, smoothing her hair, her eyes landing on the Helix Tower drawing. "Let them think what they want," she said, her voice turning steel hard. "We aren't building the Vanguard anymore. We're building the Helix." The flashbulbs were blinding. The opening of the Jenkins Sterling Museum of Modern Art was the kind of event that stopped the world. It wasn't just a building. It was a miracle. Rising from the ashes of the old site, the structure twisted into the sky like a strand of silver DNA. It spiraled upward, defying gravity, the glass panels reflecting the Seattle skyline, so that the building seemed to disappear into the clouds. It was the exact design Sarah had drawn for her thesis, fully realized, fully engineered, and fully hers. Sarah stood on the VIP terrace overlooking the sea of admirers below. She wore a gown of liquid silver that hugged her form, a statement of elegance and power. Around her neck sat a necklace of raw, uncut diamonds, wild and unbreakable. She was the CEO of JS Global now. Her net worth was in the billions. Her name was in textbooks. "They're calling it the Eighth Wonder," a deep voice said behind her. Sarah smiled and turned. Lucas stood there. He had aged beautifully, the gray at his temples giving him the look of a distinguished king. He held 2 glasses of champagne. "They can call it whatever they want," Sarah said, taking the glass. "I just call it finished." "It's never finished, Sarah," Lucas said, stepping beside her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. "We have the Tokyo project next week, and the orbital station designs for NASA." Sarah laughed, a free, joyous sound. "You never let me rest." "I promised I wouldn't let you waste your potential," he reminded her. He glanced down at her left hand. A massive emerald ring glittered on her finger. They had been married for 4 years. It was a marriage of equals, fire and steel. They argued over blueprints, they debated physics over breakfast, and they ruled the design world with an iron grip. "Speaking of waste," Lucas said, his tone shifting slightly, "I got an update on our old friend." Sarah took a sip of champagne, the bubbles dancing on her tongue. "David? He was released last week. Good behavior." "I assume he's not working in architecture," Sarah said dryly. "Hardly. No firm would touch him. He's in Ohio. He's an assistant manager at a discount flooring warehouse. He spends his days arguing with customers about laminate pricing." Sarah looked out at the city. She tried to summon the anger she used to feel. She tried to remember the pain of the rain, the humiliation of the gala. But it was like trying to recall a dream. It was distant, fading. David Thorne was no longer a monster. He was just a footnote in her biography. "He tried to reach out," Lucas added. "He sent a letter to the firm, asking for a reference." Sarah raised an eyebrow. The audacity was almost impressive. "What did you do with it?" she asked. "I burned it," Lucas said simply. "But I thought you might want to send a reply." Sarah set her champagne glass on the marble railing. She looked at the Helix Tower, her masterpiece spiraling up toward the stars. She thought about the man in Ohio selling cheap floors, forever looking up at the sky she now owned. "No letter," Sarah decided. "Send him a postcard." "A postcard?" Lucas asked, amused. "Yes, a postcard from the gift shop, a picture of the museum. She turned to Lucas, a wicked, triumphant smile curving her lips. "Right, constructed by Sarah Jenkins Sterling on the back, and underneath that." She leaned in close to her husband, her voice a whisper of pure victory. "Just right. Wish you were here, but you wouldn't fit in the building." Lucas laughed, a rich sound that echoed over the terrace. He kissed her deeply under the glow of the building they had built together. "Consider it done, my love." Sarah turned back to the crowd, the cameras flashing below like stars. She raised her hand, waving to the world that once tried to bury her, shining brighter than any diamond on her neck. She was no longer the woman who gave up everything without tears. She was the woman who took everything back with a smile. And that, my friends, is how you build an empire. Sarah didn't just survive. She soared. From a heartbroken waitress in the rain to the queen of the skyline, she proved that the best revenge isn't just success, it's erasing the people who doubted you. David is stuck selling laminate floors in Ohio while Sarah is building the future with the love of her life. If you love this story of karma, romance, and absolute power, please smash that like button. Let's try to get this video to 10,000 likes. I know we can do it. And tell me in the comments, do you think Sarah should have sent the letter, or was the postcard the perfect final burn? I read every single comment. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. We have a new tale coming next week about a nanny who inherits a kingdom. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and remember, never let anyone steal your blueprint.